If you're not successful, it's most likely because of these three things. When we watch videos like this, you are inspired, you are excited, you are filled with energy to take action. But the problem with that kind of philosophy is this: regardless of what mechanical step you take, for as long as you are defaulting these three principles, you most likely not produce the outcome. The reason you should listen is because I provide a unique approach as touching life's problem. So what you're about to hear are not regurgitated concepts, it's not something I read somewhere. This is a consequence of real life experience distilled into principles and served to the peasant audience. So the first is the ability to disregard people's opinion. You might think you understand this concept, which is not caring about what people say, etc. But in truth, we all care about what people say. If that wasn't the case, you wouldn't consider how you dress, how you speak, self presentation, ethics, and all of that. If you truly do not care about what others think, you disregard a lot of things. In fact, society would fall apart. So the real question, as well as in all subjects, is to what degree? To what degree do you care? The opinions of others is one of the most dangerous concepts as touching success. Because of the opinions, you are forced to not cross a line. You're forced to not cross a line because of what other people think. And please understand, there are people today who prevent showing their business online or promoting what they do on their social profile because of how people would think, how they would perceive them. There are people today who are waiting for the business to accumulate millions of dollars before they promote it on their social profile. If you think like that, it's most likely you're concerned with externalities, how people see you, how people perceive you, opinions of others. Had I not disregarded that concept, I wouldn't be in this position. Remember, how you do the small things translates into the big things. I recall starting my life, sitting on the floor, learning how the markets work, understanding cause and effect. You see, I was so interested. I want to know, how is it that if someone loses millions of dollars, what is the valuation? What is this? If someone loses money, where does it go to? How can I position myself there? So all of this interesting concept about money was running through my mind while my contemporaries were addicted to drugs, all kinds of substances. They made fun of me and others. So anytime I would sit on the floor, imagine this: a young man gets up at the crack of dawn to open up a book and begin to study. That's a loser right there. That's the definition of wasting your life, especially in this country where study translates into the academia. So if you're studying, it means you're preparing for an exam. If you're studying, it's connoted to something that has to do with academics. So mental work isn't considered work. If I say I'm busy, it means working for another man or some kind of physical labor. Busy doesn't connote towards mental upgrading, especially in this country. So engaging in that process, which was met with ridicule, by the way, and all kinds of sarcastic statements. You think you're going to be successful by doing this? You think you're going to be successful by doing that? In fact, but it was that process, not necessarily the engagement of the activity or what the knowledge brought about, but the ability to stay in that place in that negative cycle and still persist irrespective of the result is something I learned, is something I became. Make reference to yesterday's teaching on pain. Pain does a lot of things for you. And one thing it does is it exposes your mindset. In pressure, that's when we truly know who we are. Most of you make all kinds of quotes. I was speaking to someone who respects me a lot, and I said to him, the day the problem relative to this mindset would appear, pray to God we are not just a poser. And this is the problem with people. They try and operate on a strong frame. They talk about masculinity. In fact, this is a very interesting point that just came out from the top of my head. All of these red pillars and alpha male getting exposed is not necessarily because they were fake to begin with, but they couldn't handle the pressure relative to that mindset. So they believe what they are saying. But when push came to shove, they crumbled. There are people today who discuss mental fortitude and persistence, discipline, and all of that. But when it came down to when XYZ lost XYZ, they were addicted to pills. As a man thinketh, so he is. What happens when the business doesn't materialize in 4 years, 5 years, and all of those people you've said, check me out to the next 3 years, you are forced to bow your head in shame because the result isn't there. Opinions. Opinions. One of the reasons people give opinions is your action is the direct reflection. It holds a mirror as touching their standard. So when someone makes excuses like, I'm too poor to train, I'm too poor to go to the gym, I can't keep up with the maintenance process, and someone who is either at par with their situation or comes from worse is engaging in that discipline, they will try as much as possible to pull the person down. Not necessarily because they hate the individual, but his actions is upsetting an excuse which they've used to insulate themselves from action. So the problem is not the individual, the problem is the action. And the victims, just to say, engage in this process unconsciously. If you listen to yesterday's teaching about pain, I spoke of the unconscious mindset. Once you have a philosophy, it compels behaviors to produce that outcome. So if there's an excuse that justifies your circumstance, if you see someone shattering that belief system, you will try and fight it. That's why many people come after me when I say depression isn't real. It's not necessarily because they are trying to defend it, they are trying to defend the excuse. Opinions, opinions, opinions. If you are going to be successful, you have to get to a point where you disregard opinions, disregard thought patterns. You see, I got to a point where I stopped caring. I stopped caring. Ah, what if this person says this? If that is how you operate your life, taking into consideration what this person would say or how this person would feel if you take XYZ action, you're never going to be successful. You are never going to be successful if that's your mindset. Which leads to number two, your ability to follow your heart, leaning into your uniqueness. The first point was opinions of others, but there are people today who use the guise of conformity and principles to shatter the belief system of going against the status quo. So, for instance, there is already a pathway to produce certain results. There's already a pathway to achieve an outcome. But getting to the point where you observe this calculation and say, this is obsolete, there is a better way to do it, you'll be met with a lot of resistance. And if you've not observed this first point, it's impossible for you to bring that unique discipline. You see, the most difficult thing to do is to bet new dimensions. It's easier to replicate the process. That's why people who create new products, it's very difficult because it's met with resistance. People have never seen it before. You run into all kinds of problems. You fail. The reason you fail, because there's no roadmap. So you are the pioneer. It is painful to be a pioneer in any sphere. Let's take Christopher Nolan, for instance. He's seen as arguably one of the best directors in the world. Why is that the case? This young man, aside the illusions he creates in his movies, I don't know because I don't watch movies, but his desire to not involve CGI in his movies is what makes it unique, is what increases the creative process. You see, now in a world where AI is taking over and the use of CGI is encouraged. In fact, you seek out all of these technological advancements, and to you, you're working smarter, not harder. You see how that sticking to his uniqueness has earned him the title of the best director. Like I said, you won't be able to stick to what you believe in. You won't be able to follow your heart if you've not observed the first point, which is disregarding opinions. So your unique ability would only come as a consequence of you giving permission to explore that dimension of yourself. For instance, people might categorize me as proud, nonchalant. Unfortunately, these are the virtues that help me explore a certain aspect of my life. In a world where everybody wants to be liked, people are seeker friendly, everybody's looking up how to be charismatic and all of that. You see, the simplest way to be confident, charismatic, all of these virtues you desire is to be authentic. If you are truly yourself, all of these virtues manifest as a byproduct. I'll give you an instance. To a girl you don't like, you're yourself, you're confident, you do not respond to things you think are stupid, your opinions are voiced out almost immediately, which makes the desire heightened. Conversely, to someone you don't like, you are submissive, you tolerate excuses, you do not enforce boundaries, and it acts as a repellent to desire. You now see the paradox of want. It's not necessarily an abstract theory that everybody I like doesn't like me and the people I don't like me. It's because to the people you like, you're becoming something else. You're trying to create a persona you think they like. While to the people you don't like, you are yourself, the most confident version of yourself. And this is what you humans don't do. You do not observe your reality. I want you to observe yourself next time you're interacting with someone you do not like. The way you dismiss her, you're nonchalant, you don't really care, she does all the talking, all of that. You see? So if you can translate that mindset to the other side, you most likely would experience reciprocity in attraction. So that's the second one. Your ability to follow your heart, hone your uniqueness. You see, there is something that only you can achieve on this earth. There is something that is unique to your destiny. You have to find that uniqueness, that thing that brings out the child in you, the process that which you can engage in without time being a factor. That is something you need to find, because it's in exploring that unique dimension. There are so many intricacies, there are so many little details that people would miss. But because of your desire and persistence and love for this venture, you'll be able to identify those small things. And my friend, it's the small differences that gain all the spoils. A hedge fund manager who trades at 80% annually and someone who trades at 82%, who do you think is getting the investment? All the investment is going to the latter guy. Why? Because of that 2% difference. People will bend over backwards just to get even a minuscule, even a tiny increment in result. My apologies, PTSD. You already know. So that's the second one. The third is fear of failure. Very recently, I was playing a game of chess and something very interesting happened. I lost. I know it's difficult to believe, but I lost. I clicked replay and I continued. I lost again. I hit rematch and I continued. But it dawned upon me, it didn't cross my mind that I was actually failing. Why? Because there was nobody to witness that failure. So I came to the conclusion that we do not fear failure because of the objective. We do not fear failure in and of itself. We fear that activity because of the perception of others. You now see that this teaching is stacked in and of itself. If you're unable to disregard people's opinion, if you're unable to do number two, it will be difficult to engage in number three. Fear of failure. Fear of failure. Fear of failure paralyzes most of you more than you think. It's better to start. You see, if you hypothesize how many times you would fail, you never know. All you're observing is permutation. And in fact, I would argue it's better to spend mental energy investing in success than failure. Remember our theory, the mind compels behaviors to produce an outcome. So if you are thinking failure, you would always produce failure. And when you fail, you would say, I knew it. And you were right. And you were right. So, fear of failure, you do not fear the activity, but the perception. Nobody wants to start a business, and at the end of the year, after making mouth and all of the advertising, you come back to the Thanksgiving table with a failed t shirt of the company. Nobody wants to start something from his warm basement, and after investing and posting and all of the promotion you did, you put yourself out there that I've started this business and fail. Nobody wants to engage in that experience, but yet it is this activity that produces results. If you do not do it, it's impossible for you to achieve success, for you to achieve the desired goal. Fear of failure. There was this business I struggled with, and I wanted to open this business, but I kept procrastinating. Then I asked myself if I was able to do this business in an environment where I was unknown, would I do it? Yes. And some of you would pursue that business with a lot of vigor. In fact, you'll be curious as to where this energy is coming from. Why? Because you have nothing to lose. Anytime you engage in an activity, you tie some form of yourself to it. That's why it's difficult for billionaires and people who are big, especially when they have insecurity, to do new things. They become conservative. Why? Because they do not want to be associated with failure or failed company. Humans do this all the time. You want a rich friend, not necessarily because of the perks, but the association increases your social status. Remember, the mind compels behaviors to produce outcome. So if the mind sees the slightest chance of this business failing, guess what? Exactly, it will keep compelling behaviors that encourages procrastination and you never get it done. So quick recap. First, disregard people's opinion. This is important. If you're unable to disregard people's opinion, it will be difficult to follow suit. Number two, follow your heart. If you're unable to follow your heart, that uniqueness, the intricacy of a certain venture would not be discovered and an edge never developed. Remember, it is in the tiny details that create the separation. An 82% hedge fund manager would always be desirable than the former example. The third, fear of failure. Most of you would be able to approach a lady confidently if nobody was around. Most of you would be able to do dirty and silly dances if you were a mascot. Why? Because your identity is hidden. So the failure is not necessarily what you're concerned with. What you're concerned with is your identity being attached to that event. And I promised you, all of these principles were going to be unique. And I hope I fulfill that promise. Let me know in the comment section. And as always, my friends, it's a pleasure speaking to you. I'll see you in the next one.